The east corridor of Holyrood House Palace was 47 meters long. Akefer knew this because he had walked it 214 times, once at the start of each posting, a single permitted circuit before assuming position at the north end beside the portrait of Charles II that nobody ever looked at. 47 meters of red carpet runner, dark oak paneling, and the specific silence that old buildings manufactured. Not quiet exactly, but a density of air that swallowed sound before it could travel. He had stood this post more than any other guard in the Edinburgh detachment, not by request, by default. New guards got the forecourt, the visible assignments, the positions tourists photographed. Akefer got the east corridor because he was good at disappearing into it. His commanding officer had said this once as a compliment. Akefer had filed it somewhere he didn't revisit. It was 11:14 on a Tuesday in late October. No public tour scheduled, no royal visit, no events, just the palace doing what palaces did on unremarkable days, existing, mostly for its own sake, attended by staff who moved through it like blood through something that had stopped needing to pump. Akefer was on his second hour. He was not thinking about the door. Then he was. The east corridor had 6 doors on its western wall. 5 led to storage rooms, decommissioned staff quarters, a linen archive that hadn't been accessed since 2019. The 6th, the last one before the corridor turned north toward the portrait gallery, led to the old estate office, repurposed twice and currently used for nothing. Akefer knew this because he had stood beside that door, or near it, or within eyeline of it, for a cumulative total that he had never calculated and didn't intend to. The door was always locked. The door was not, at 11:14 on a Tuesday in late October, fully closed. Not open, not ajar in any dramatic sense. The latch was not engaged. A gap of perhaps 4 millimeters between door and frame, detectable only because the light from the corridor created a thin line along the edge where no line should have been. Akefer looked at it for 11 seconds before he moved. Not because he was uncertain, because he had learned, a long time ago and in a different country, that the first thing you did when something was wrong was establish that you were seeing it correctly, that you weren't constructing threat from boredom, that the thing you were looking at was actually the thing you were looking at. 4 millimeters, consistent, not shifting, not a draft problem. The latch was retracted. Someone had been through that door, recently enough that it hadn't re-engaged. Or someone was still inside. Akefer walked the 31 meters to the door and placed one hand flat against it. Pushed gently. It swung inward 6 inches before he stopped it, dark inside. The smell of old paper and something underneath it, something colder, damper, stone, below ground stone. He pulled it back to 4 millimeters, stood, thought. He was a ceremonial guard. His remit was the corridor. His job was to stand at the north end and be present and visible and still, and if anything happened, radio it upward and wait for instruction. That was the job, the whole job. He radioed upward. Staff Sergeant James Akefer was 36 years old. He had joined the British Army at 19 on a Tuesday in March, during a rainstorm, because the recruitment office was the only warm building he'd been willing to walk into on that particular Tuesday in that particular March, and he had come out the other side of the experience a soldier almost by accident. The accident had taken him to Catterick, then Brecon, then, after he'd proved that he could read a landscape the way most people couldn't read a room, to the Reconnaissance Corps. 3 tour. Iraq first, 2011. Syria twice after that, 2013 and 2014. The work was patience and observation mostly, moving through terrain without disturbing it, watching things that didn't know they were being watched, finding the anomaly inside the static. He was good at it, not decorated good, not mentioned in dispatches good, just quietly, practically good, in the way that kept units alive rather than generating citations. He'd come to the Royal Guard at 27 after a knee reconstruction that ended field work. The transition had seemed logical at the time. He had the bearing, the service record, the security clearance. What he had not anticipated was the specific quality of the stillness required. Military stillness was active. You were still because you were watching, because you were ready, because the stillness was preparation for something. Palace stillness was different. It was an end in itself. You were still so that tourists could photograph you, so that the building could feel attended, so that the tradition of attendance could be maintained. Akhefer had spent 9 years trying to locate the distinction in his body and failing. He knew the East Corridor. He knew the stone beneath the oak paneling, the draft patterns in winter, the way the light changed between morning and afternoon postings, the sound the building made when the temperature dropped. He knew it the way a reconnaissance officer knew a grid square, not by walking through it, but by inhabiting it, by letting it become the thing his attention rested against for so long that any change registered before he had consciously processed it. The door was never unlocked. He knew that the way he knew the corridor was 47 meters. Not because anyone had told him, because he had been standing next to it, on and off, for 9 years. Mosul, November 2014. The unit had been moving through the Hay al-Zahra district, building by building, after a tip that turned out to be partially accurate in the way tips in that city usually were true in the geography, false in the specifics. 3 buildings cleared, nothing found, the 4th coming up on their left. The 4th building looked abandoned, properly abandoned, windows gone, door hanging, dust on the threshold that had the consistency of weeks of accumulation. Lieutenant Ademi had raised his fist. Standard halt. Akhefer had looked at the threshold for 6 seconds. The dust was wrong. Not the quantity of it, the pattern. Dust accumulated in corners and along edges, settled inward from windows and door frames, built up wherever air moved least. The pattern on that threshold showed disturbance near the center, a partial clearing, the kind made by something dragged or someone stepping. It was old enough not to be fresh, recent enough not to be weeks. Someone had been through that door in the last 48 hours. He'd said it quietly to Ademi, 6 words. The dust is disturbed on the threshold. Ademi had looked, taken 4 seconds, then redirected the unit. Inside, 2 British contractors from a survey firm, alive, 11 days in. Dehydrated, one with a broken wrist, both coherent enough to be furious about their rescue taking this long. Ademi had pulled Akhefer aside after the extraction, after the medics, after the reporting. "You nearly didn't say it," Ademi said. Akhefer had looked at him. "I saw you clock the threshold and then look away. You almost talked yourself out of it." Ademi had let that sit. The moment you start editing what your eyes tell you, you stop being useful to anyone. He paused. The building that looks emptiest is the one you check first, not because it's dramatic, because everyone else already walked past it. Akhefer had carried that for 12 years. It was what he was carrying now, standing in the East Corridor of Holyrood House with his hand resting against a door that was 4 millimeters from closed, waiting for someone to answer his radio call. The radio crackled. Corporal Fenwick from the guard room. "East Corridor, what's the situation, Sergeant?" "Door anomaly at position 6. The old estate office. Latch disengaged. I need to know the last authorized access." A pause. "That room isn't on the access log. Stand by." Akhefer stood by. He looked at the door. He thought about the dust on the Mosul threshold. He waited. Gerald Holt arrived 11 minutes later. Not Fenwick, not the guard commander. Holt, which was itself a data point. The chief steward did not typically attend to reported door anomalies in disused corridors. He was a man who existed 3 organizational layers above maintenance concerns, who managed the domestic and administrative operations of the palace with the air of someone who had personally invented bureaucracy and was still owed royalties for it. 61 years old, 19 years in post. Gray suit, always the same cut. The kind of man who was so consistently present in institutional spaces that he had become part of the architecture. He walked the corridor at pace, reading Akafer's position before he arrived, calibrating. Sergeant Akafer, flat, not a greeting, an identification. Mr. Holt, I reported a door anomaly at. I read the log. Holt stopped 4 feet away, looked at the door briefly with the focused disinterest of someone checking a box. Maintenance accessed this room last week. Ventilation survey. They'll have failed to re-engage the latch properly. He looked back at Akafer. It's been noted. It'll be rectified. I'd like to confirm the room is empty before I. The room is empty, Sergeant. Still flat. A temperature in the words that wasn't quite cold, just evacuated of warmth. It has been empty for 3 years. Akafer looked at him. I'd still like to confirm. Something shifted in Holt's face. Minor, the kind of shift that happened when a calculation was being run. Your posting is the corridor, Holt said, not the rooms adjacent to it. The distinction matters. With respect, authorized personnel have access to this room through proper channels. Holt's voice had not risen. It had tightened. A different thing. A royal guard does not constitute authorized personnel for interior access. You know this. Akafer knew this. I'm noting the anomaly for the record. It's noted. Holt returned to your post. He walked back down the corridor. His footsteps were precise, the footsteps of a man who had walked this corridor for 19 years and had never once felt the need to count them. He didn't look back. Akafer returned to the north end of the corridor. He stood beside the portrait of Charles II. He looked at the door. He thought about Ademi. The moment you start editing what your eyes tell you, you stop being useful. Holt had not opened the door. In the 11 minutes between Akafer's radio call and Holt's arrival, the chief steward had traveled from the administrative wing on the palace's opposite side, climbed 1 floor, walked the length of the building, and arrived at the east corridor to tell a ceremonial guard that an unlocked door was a maintenance issue. 11 minutes for a maintenance issue. Akafer stood at his post. He was very still. He was not, for the first time in 9 years, empty. It came at 13:42, 90 minutes after Holt had left. Akafer had been rotated to a second hour by then. Technically, he should have been relieved at 13:00, but Fenwick was running 20 minutes late on the changeover, and the East Corridor did not rank highly enough to generate urgency about the gap. He had stayed, partly protocol, partly something else he didn't examine directly. He heard it during a moment when the palace's ambient noise dipped, the heating system cycling off. No footsteps elsewhere in the building. The specific suspended quality of a large stone structure at rest. Tapping below him, below the floor. Not the building's pipes, which ran along the west wall and spoke a different language, irregular, pressure-driven, random. This was rhythmic, patterned. It stopped, then started, then stopped again with a deliberateness that pipes did not have. Akafer crouched, pressed his palm flat to the floor. Felt it through the oak boards, faint but consistent, coming from his left toward the far wall, toward the area beneath the 6th door. He counted the intervals. Short, 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 long, 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 short, short, short. He sat with that for 4 seconds. SOS in Morse was 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, the most basic distress signal in the international vocabulary, designed to be transmittable by anyone who had ever been told, once in passing, that it existed. This was slower than standard Morse, imperfect in its spacing. The long signals were inconsistently long, the short ones sometimes bleeding into each other. Someone who had been taught it decades ago, in a different context, and was now trying to remember it under conditions that made remembering difficult. But the pattern was there. Akafer pressed his radio. Fenwick. Go ahead. I need the guard commander, East Corridor, now." He paused. "And I need to know if there's a subfloor space or cellar access in the area of position 6. A longer pause. "Sergeant, the building plans." "Fenwick, guard commander, now." He stood up. He looked at the 6th door. He did not wait for the guard commander. The door opened on darkness. Not the ordinary dark of a room with curtains drawn, but the specific dark of a space with no windows, absolute, directional, the dark that old buildings kept underneath themselves like a held breath. There were stairs, stone, uneven, descending at a pitch steeper than modern building codes permitted, which meant they preceded modern building codes by some margin. Akeffer took them with one hand on the wall, moving by the pressure of his palm against cold stone. The room at the bottom was perhaps 8 by 10 meters, shelving on 3 walls, most of it empty, some of it carrying the remnants of a wine storage system, metal brackets, wooden dividers, the ghost of organization. The floor was flagstone. The temperature was perhaps 8 degrees Celsius, maybe 7. The tapping had stopped when Akeffer opened the door. "Hello," he said, not loud. The space was small enough that he didn't need volume. A sound from the far right corner, behind a collapsed shelving unit that had been pulled forward from the wall or had fallen or had been moved. Akeffer crossed to it, moved it 6 inches and turned his phone torch on. Sir Alistair Drummond was on the floor. 71 years old, which Akeffer did not know yet but would learn within the hour. He was wearing what had been, 2 days ago, a well-maintained tweed suit. The kind that announced its owner had been wearing exactly this suit for 40 years and saw no reason to stop. The jacket was over his shoulders like a blanket, conserving warmth with the specific pragmatism of someone who had been cold long enough to get methodical about it. He was propped against the wall. His left hand was resting on the flagstone beside him, a length of metal shelf bracket beside it, what he'd been using to tap against the floor above. His right hand was in his lap, holding a piece of paper folded into quarters, gripped with the pressure of someone who had decided this particular piece of paper was not going to leave their possession under any circumstances. His color was wrong, not alarming wrong, not emergency wrong, not yet, but the gray underneath pale of someone running on the last of their metabolic reserves. He looked up at Akeffer with eyes that were still entirely present. "Took your time," Sir Alistair said. His voice was dry, literally dry, cracked with dehydration, and also dry in the other way, the way that suggested he had been a man who made remarks like this his entire life, and 2 days in a cold cellar had not changed his fundamental personality. "Sir," Akeffer was already on the radio, "I need medical, East Corridor sublevel now, code 2, elderly male, conscious, hypothermic, approximately 48 hours exposure." He crouched down to Alistair's level. "Can you move your legs?" "I can move everything." A pause, slowly. "Stay still, help's coming." Alistair looked at him with the focused appraisal of someone who had spent a career evaluating people quickly. "You're the guard who was upstairs," he said. "I heard your boots, this morning and yesterday, same pattern. You heard me through the floor. Stone carries sound." He shifted slightly, winced. "I was a signals officer. 1st Signal Brigade, 1975 to 1997. The Morse was a risk. I wasn't sure anyone would recognize it. Wasn't sure I remembered it correctly." "You remembered enough." Alistair looked at the piece of paper in his hand, then at Akeffer. "I need this to go somewhere safe," he said. "Not to Holt. Not to anyone Holt reports to directly. Someone above that chain." Akeffer looked at the paper, didn't take it yet. "Tell me what it is first." "Proof," Alistair said, "that Gerald Holt has been systematically redirecting estate maintenance funds for 11 years. He paused. "Approximately £640,000. The cellar was very quiet. "I found the discrepancy by accident," Alistair said, "and then he found me finding it." Akafor reached out and took the paper, held it without unfolding it. "Okay," he said, "let's get you up first." They had moved Alistair to the guard station by the time the medics arrived. A slow process, one step at a time up the stone stairs, Akafor's arm under his, neither of them speaking because the staircase was too narrow and too steep for conversation. By the time they reached the corridor floor, Alistair's breathing had steadied, and his color was returning to something closer to functional. He sat in the guard station's single chair, a battered thing that had no business being this close to a royal palace, wrapped in a thermal blanket from the emergency kit, hands around a paper cup of water. The medics had assessed him. Mild hypothermia, significant dehydration, no cardiac events detected. He would need hospital observation. He declined to go until he had spoken. Detective Inspector Mara Cahill from Police Scotland arrived 22 minutes after Akafor's call. 44 years old, 12 years in serious crime. She had the specific quality of attention that made people feel both observed and safe, which was a difficult combination to engineer, and she appeared to do it without effort. She sat across from Alistair, let him set the pace. "I was invited as part of the Holyrood Heritage Review," Alistair said. "I sit on the advisory board. We do this every 3 years, an assessment of the estate's historical assets, their condition, their documentation. I have done it 5 times. He took a careful sip of water. "Part of the review involves cross-referencing the current estate maintenance records against the historical ledgers, to identify what has been preserved, what has deteriorated, what requires intervention." Cahill made notes, didn't interrupt. "I was in the records room on the ground floor, the public records room, which I have full access to as a board member on Sunday morning, reviewing the 2013 through 2018 maintenance ledgers." He paused. The numbers had been altered. "How did you identify that?" "Because I have reviewed these records 5 times, Alistair said, with the patience of someone explaining something for what they were determined would be the last time. I know what authentic maintenance expenditure for a palace estate looks like across a decade. I know the variance ranges. The 2015 figures showed a 43% increase in subcontracted drainage remediation costs, with no corresponding improvement to the drainage infrastructure, which I know, because I walked that infrastructure myself during the 2018 review and noted that it had not been substantially upgraded since 2009. Cahill looked at him. "You identified a £640,000 fraud by noticing that the drainage hadn't been fixed." "I identified the initial anomaly," Alistair said. "The full extent took me approximately 90 minutes to extrapolate. The pattern was consistent across 11 years once you knew where to look." He was quiet for a moment. "Holt manages the domestic accounts. He has done so since 2005. The subcontractors he had been invoicing either did not exist or had been paid a fraction of the documented amount, with the remainder redirected." He paused again. "I made the mistake of being too absorbed in the records to notice he'd come into the room." "What did he say?" "Very little." Alistair's mouth compressed slightly. "He asked what I was looking at. I told him. He said the figures had been audited and were correct. I said I didn't think they had been." A pause. "He asked me to accompany him to discuss it privately. I was foolish enough to agree." Cahill waited. "He took me to the East Corridor, said there were additional records in the estate office that would clarify the figures. I went in ahead of him." Alistair's jaw shifted. "He closed the door. I heard the lock engage. When I tried it, it didn't move." He looked at his hands. "There were stairs. I didn't find them immediately. It was dark and I didn't have my phone. I'd left it charging in the records room. I found the stairs by feel. The cellar." He looked up. "He put me in the cellar and locked the door at the top, and went back to being the chief steward of Holyrood House Palace." The guard station was very quiet. "He came back once," Alistair said. "Yesterday morning, opened the door at the top of the stairs, didn't come down. Said that a man of my age found wandering in a restricted area in a confused state wouldn't necessarily be believed about much." He paused. He said he would arrange for me to be collected and returned to my residence in Edinburgh, and that the matter could be resolved quietly if I was willing to be sensible about it. Another pause. I told him what he could do with that offer. Akaffer, standing in the doorway of the guard station, felt something settle in his chest. He knew that quality of courage, not the dramatic kind, the quiet, cold, stubborn kind. The kind that people produced when they had decided that what they knew mattered more than what it would cost them to say it. He didn't come back after that, Alistair said. I found the shelf bracket on the second day, started tapping. He looked at Akaffer. I heard your boots. Same post, same circuit, same timing. I thought if anyone was going to hear pattern, it was going to be whoever had been standing in that corridor long enough to know what didn't belong in it. Akaffer looked at him. You were right, he said. Corporal Fenwick arrived first. He took one look at Alistair Drummond in the thermal blanket, at the piece of paper now in a Police Scotland evidence bag, at Akaffer's expression, and became very quiet and very useful, the ideal response. Guard Commander Major Harriet Selby arrived 9 minutes later, former Royal Military Police. She listened to Akaffer's account without moving her face, which was the face of someone processing the gap between what should have happened and what did. When he finished, she said 3 words, "Where is Holt?" and radioed it before Akaffer could answer. Holt was in his office. He was shredding documents when they reached him, which was either the most incriminating behavior available to him or an act of such spectacular administrative arrogance that it amounted to the same thing. He looked up when Selby entered. He looked at Akaffer behind her. His face did something complicated. Selby put her hand on the shredder, turned it off, said, "Step away from the desk, Mr. Holt." He stepped away. Cahill arrived with a second officer 2 minutes after that. She looked at the shredder, at the desk, at the 3 inches of partially shredded paper visible in the collection bin, with the expression of someone who had been doing this job long enough to know that partial destruction of evidence was still evidence. Holt's lawyer was called. He said nothing further. The palace secretary, a man named David Forsyth who had held his position for 6 years and looked as though the last 20 minutes had aged him considerably, arrived and stood in the doorway of Holt's office reading the situation with the focused horror of someone counting the consequences. He turned to Selby. "How long?" he said. "Not are you sure, not is this confirmed, just how long?" 11 years, Selby said, approximately. Forsyth closed his eyes for 2 seconds, opened them. "I need to make calls," he said, and walked away. Akaffer stood in the corridor outside Holt's office and watched it all move around him, the police, the palace administration, the controlled emergency of an institution discovering something rotten at its own center. He had a statement to give. He would give it. He had paperwork to complete. He would complete it. He looked at his hands. He had not been this awake in 9 years. The summons came 3 days later. Not a request. A time, a room number, a name. Lord William Carver, Lord Steward of the Household, wished to speak with Staff Sergeant James Akaffer at 10:00 on Friday morning in the first-floor study. The Lord Steward of the Household was not a ceremonial title. It was the oldest domestic office in the British royal structure, predating most of the institutions that had grown up around it, responsible for the overall management of the sovereign's household in Scotland. The current holder was 73 years old, had held the position for 11 years, and had the bearing of someone who had spent those 11 years being the most serious person in any room he entered. He was sitting behind a desk that had been in that room longer than anyone currently alive when Akaffer arrived. "Sit down, Sergeant Akaffer." Akaffer sat. Carver studied him for a moment with the unhurried attention of a man who had made significant decisions about people for 4 decades. "I have read your full report," he said. "I have also spoken with Sir Alistair, with Major Selby, and with Detective Inspector Cahill." He paused. "I want to hear it from you directly, not the report. what you observed in the order you observed it, and what you chose to do at each point. Akeffer told him, the door, the gap, Holt's arrival and dismissal, the tapping, the descent, the cellar. He was concise, not because he was abbreviating, but because the facts were already compressed, already in the order that mattered. Recon trained that out of you. The unnecessary word costs time you don't always have. Carver listened without interrupting. When Akeffer finished, Carver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have been in royal household service for 40 years. In that time, to my knowledge, no ceremonial guard has deviated from a posted position without direct authorization from a superior officer. He paused. Not once. Akeffer held his gaze, waited. I am not telling you that as a reprimand, Carver said. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic. The quality of attention between two men recalibrating toward each other. Gerald Holt has worked within this household for 19 years, Carver said. He was thorough, organized, and trusted. What he was also doing with that trust cost this estate and the people who depend on it considerably. He looked at Akeffer. He was able to do it for 11 years because everyone who might have noticed was operating within the proper channels of their role, staying in their lane, as it were. A pause. You were not. No, sir. Why? Akeffer thought about it properly before he answered the actual question, which was not what did you see, but why did you trust it? Because I spent 3 tours learning to read static environments for anomalies, he said. And then I spent 9 years in the most static environment I've ever been placed in, not reading it. He paused. I think I've been trained to see things that nobody was asking me to see. And at some point, the gap between what I was capable of and what I was permitted to do started to feel like disappearing. Carver looked at him for a long moment. And when you saw the door, he said, you decided to stop disappearing. Akeffer said nothing. That was the accurate version of it. Holt told you your observations were not within your remit, Carver said. Yes, sir. He was technically correct about your formal remit. Carver folded his hands on the desk. He was entirely wrong about what your capacity for observation is worth to this household. He paused. There is a difference between what an institution asks of a person and what that person is actually for. Institutions, in my experience, are frequently confused about this distinction. The person rarely should be. He reached into a drawer, produced a letter on crested paper, slid it across the desk. This is a formal commendation, Carver said. Signed by myself, countersigned by Major Selby, and noted in your permanent record. He paused. There will also be a review of the ceremonial guard posting structure, specifically whether guards of your experience and background are best deployed in purely static roles. He looked at Akeffer directly. We have been, I think, wasting you. Akeffer looked at the letter, picked it up. Sir Alistair asked me to pass on a message, Carver said. He allowed himself, for the first time in the conversation, something adjacent to an expression. He said, and I am quoting directly, tell him the building that looks emptiest is the one worth checking. Akeffer stilled. He said you'd understand the reference. Yes, sir, Akeffer said. I understand it. Carver nodded. That's all, Sergeant. Akeffer stood, folded the letter, put it in his breast pocket, moved toward the door. Akeffer. He stopped. The institution works, Carver said, because people like you keep it honest. Not the people with the titles, not the people with the administrative authority, the people standing in the corridor, paying attention when everyone else has decided there's nothing to pay attention to. A pause. Don't let anyone convince you that's a small thing. Akeffer walked out. The corridor outside was long and quiet and familiar. He walked the length of it. He counted his steps. The story broke in 6 weeks, not the way palace stories usually broke, not through a leak, not through a photographer, not through the careful managed release of a press office operating at maximum spin. It broke because the criminal proceedings against Gerald Holt were matters of public record, and public records were, by definition, public. Palace steward charged 11 years, £640,000, and one unlocked door. That was the headline that got the most circulation, which Okafor read on his phone on a Wednesday morning with the specific discomfort of seeing something private become national shorthand. He declined the interview requests, all of them. There were more than he'd expected, which told him something about what the public found interesting, which was, he supposed, the same thing he'd found interesting about the Mosul threshold 12 years ago. The anomaly inside the static. The thing that wasn't supposed to move, moving. He gave his formal statement to Police Scotland. He attended one internal review. He went back to work. The East Corridor was the same. 47 meters, red carpet runner, dark oak, the portrait of Charles II that nobody looked at, the silence that old buildings manufactured. He did his opening circuit, took his position. He was waiting on a transfer recommendation. Carver's review was working its way through the appropriate channels at the pace that appropriate channels moved, which was to say, eventually. In the meantime, same post, same corridor. But the stillness had changed. He wasn't sure he could explain it precisely. It wasn't that he was more alert. He had always been alert. That had never been the problem. It was that the alertness had somewhere to go now. It connected to something. The 9 years of standing in this corridor, counting his steps and watching the light change and cataloging the draft patterns, all of that had not been wasted. It had been preparation for the day when a latch didn't engage and someone underneath, the floor, remembered half of what they knew about Morse code. The institution had asked him to disappear. He had been too good at his actual job to manage it. The letter came on a Thursday, 6 weeks and 2 days after Alastair Drummond had been helped up a flight of stone stairs, with one hand braced against a cold wall. It was waiting in Okafor's pigeonhole at the guard station when he arrived for his shift, a cream envelope, addressed in handwriting that belonged to a generation that had been taught penmanship as a serious subject, on paper with a small crest embossed in the upper left corner that Okafor didn't recognize but looked up afterward. The Drummond family arms, registered 1487. He read it on the 1822 train from Waverley to Haymarket, sitting in the window seat he always took, the city falling away behind him into the early dark of a Scottish November. Dear Sergeant Okafor, it began, and continued for 2 pages in the same deliberate hand, not long, not effusive, but careful. Alastair Drummond had written him the kind of letter that people wrote when they understood the weight of what they were thanking someone for and did not want to cheapen it with excess. He wrote about the cellar, about the cold, which he described with the dry specificity of a former military man assessing conditions rather than complaining about them. He wrote about the tapping, how he had done the Morse for 2 hours before Okafor arrived on his second posting of the day, and had almost stopped because his hand was cramping and the bracket was heavy and silence was easier. He wrote, I heard your footsteps and I thought, there is someone who has been in this corridor long enough to know it. If anyone will notice that the tapping doesn't belong, it will be him. So I kept going. Then at the bottom of the second page, in the same unhurried hand, you stood in that corridor for 9 years. The institution thought it was using you as furniture. You were, in fact, learning the building. Those are not the same thing. I hope you know the difference. I suspect you do. Okafor folded the letter carefully, put it in his breast pocket, against the commendation already there, 2 pieces of paper that said the same thing in different registers. One institutional, one personal, both telling him that the thing he had almost talked himself out of trusting was the most valuable thing he had. The train moved through the dark. Tomorrow, same time, same post. 47 meters, the portrait nobody looked at, the 6th door. He would stand there differently. He already was.